I never expected her to remember my name, let alone everything else. It was nearly midnight when I found myself at the corner store, the one with the flickering fluorescent sign that always smelled faintly of coffee and detergent. I wasn't buying much, just a bottle of water, and maybe a pack of gum if I felt like splurging, but I stayed longer than necessary, twisting the cap back onto the bottle and twisting it again like the world outside could wait. She was in the aisle across from me, reaching for a box of cereal. I'd seen her before, of course. Everyone in town had. My friend's mom, perfectly composed, hair pulled back in that low bun that made her neck look impossibly long. Tonight, she wore a sweater that hung loose over her shoulders, the kind that looked like it belonged in someone else's apartment. She hummed something quiet, not thinking anyone could hear. "Hey," I said, unsure if I should be saying anything at all. She glanced up, and for a second, it felt like the store had contracted, all noise folding into that glance. "Hey," she said back, slow, deliberate, as if weighing the syllable. Then she smiled, small, like she was letting me in on a secret I hadn't been aware I wanted. I remember my own hand doing something I didn't quite register, folding the edge of my bottle label, pressing it between my fingers. Nervous. I hadn't noticed my pulse until I felt it there, in that simple, stupid gesture. "You still drink the same thing every night?" she asked, nodding toward the water bottle. She didn't sound judgmental. It was just a question, lightly spoken, that somehow made the night feel warmer. "Yeah," I said, fumbling. "Habit, I guess." She laughed softly, eyes flicking down to her own hands for a moment before returning to mine. "I always liked that about you. Consistency." The words hovered. Too casual to be a confession, too pointed to be empty. I looked away, pretending to check the shelves, but I couldn't. She was still there, still smiling just enough to make my chest tighten. I'd texted her before, never sent a word. Notes I'd written at 3 in the morning, pauses mid-sentence, deleting half of it. My phone had that pile of unsent drafts, little pieces of me I couldn't seem to share. It wasn't dramatic. It was just the way I existed when no one was watching. We moved along the aisles in the quiet rhythm of late-night shoppers, occasionally brushing past each other, fingertips grazing over canned soup or a pack of crackers. Small gestures, electric in their subtlety. "Coffee sometime?" she asked as we approached the counter, her voice low enough that the cashier didn't catch it. A genuine question, casual, almost as if she had no idea what it meant to me. Yeah, sure," I said, stammering more than I expected. My eyes darted toward the receipt printer, toward the door, anything to stall the words. She smiled again, just a trace, and I noticed how her fingers lingered on the counter, tapping a quiet rhythm, maybe unaware. When we stepped outside, the night had thickened, streetlights pooling into golden puddles on the wet asphalt. She tucked her hands into her sweater pockets and glanced at me. "I'll text you." "Oh, wait," I said, unsure why I said it. My throat was tight, my stomach buzzing with anticipation I didn't want to name. She nodded, just once, and then walked toward her car. The engine hummed. Headlights reflected off the rain-slicked street. I lingered by the curb, the bottle of water cold against my palm, and the echo of her words, her smile, the tiny moments of attention she'd given me, all coiled tight inside my chest. I didn't know if she would, or when, but my phone buzzed anyway, a new message waiting. I stared at the screen, thumb hovering, and for the first time that night, I didn't care if I hesitated. I didn't expect to see her again so soon. Her text had been short, almost cryptic, "Coffee tomorrow. My place. Noon." Her apartment smelled faintly of chamomile and old books when I stepped inside. Sunlight slanted across the floor, catching dust motes that danced like tiny golden sparks. She handed me a mug, warm in my hands, and I realized I had been holding my own fingers in the same way all morning, twisting and untwisting, waiting. "You know," she said, settling into the armchair across from me, "I didn't always live here. I used to have a tiny place downtown. Worst heating system you could imagine. You'd think I'd miss it," but she trailed off, eyes distant. "That bad?" I asked, leaning forward, pretending casual curiosity, but secretly desperate for more. She smiled faintly, hands cradling the mug. It was character building. Mostly, I missed the way my neighbor would bang on the radiator when it got too loud. Silly, huh? No, not silly, I said, noticing how her knuckles whitened around the cup. How her gaze lingered on some point behind me, as if it wasn't just the radiator she remembered. The clock ticked between us. I sipped my tea too slowly, afraid to break the fragile rhythm of the room. She hummed softly, and, for a second, it felt like the air itself was holding its breath. I caught myself imagining what it would be like if none of the lines existed. The age gap, the friendship boundary, the quiet whispers of judgment that hovered like fog whenever I thought about my friend. Every scenario played out in my mind, tiny variations of holding hands, leaning too close, saying something I shouldn't. She moved to clear the small pile of books stacked on the side table. I reached out instinctively, as if to help, and our fingers brushed. My stomach flipped. She didn't pull away. Instead, she gave a little shake of her head, a wry smile, as though acknowledging the gravity of simple touch. "You're good at noticing little things," she said, voice quiet. Not a compliment exactly, more like a statement of fact. I swallowed. "I guess I notice what matters," I said, unsure if I meant the books, the smell of tea, or her. Silence stretched, comfortable and terrifying all at once. I watched her stir her tea slowly, eyes occasionally flicking up to meet mine, holding it just long enough that I felt both seen and exposed. "Sometimes I forget," she said finally, a confession barely above a whisper, "that people even notice me at all, that they care." And in that moment, I knew the quiet risk we were dancing around. I imagined the scolding words from my friend, the judgmental gaze of anyone who knew. And yet, I couldn't move. Couldn't stop noticing the curve of her lips when she smiled, the way her hands lingered over the mug, small gestures that meant more than they should. I cleared my throat and made a joke, awkward, self-deprecating, the kind that floated lightly in the tension. She laughed, and it sounded softer than I expected. Our eyes met, and she held the gaze longer than necessary. A touch of warmth, a shared understanding, a flicker of permission. I don't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. I didn't mean to linger, but somehow, my feet found the hallway leading to her apartment again. The door was half open, like she'd been expecting me, or maybe just letting the world slip by. She looked up from the kitchen counter when I stepped in. "Hey," she said, calm, but there was a flicker, quick, almost invisible, around her eyes. Hesitation. "Hey," I replied, carrying my mug a little too close to my chest. I tried to sound casual. Failed. We sat, side by side, on the narrow couch. Her hands were folded over her knees. My own fidgeted with the rim of the mug. We didn't speak for a while. The silence wasn't empty. It had edges. Tension you could almost slice. "You've been quiet," she said finally. Not accusatory. Just noting. Just thinking, I mumbled. My eyes caught hers for a moment. She smiled, but it didn't reach the corners. She looked down, tugged at the edge of her sweater. She wasn't shutting me out. Not completely. Just holding herself back. And I understood. A knock at the door startled both of us. My heart jumped. She froze, fingers tightening around her mug. "It's my friend," she said, almost apologetically. I felt it then. The sudden reminder that we weren't alone in this quiet orbit we'd made. That someone could notice. That this wasn't just us. We moved apart slightly as she answered. I hovered near the doorway, unsure what to do with myself. My mind raced. Did she want me to leave? Did she know stop? Don't think that. When she returned, she carried another cup of tea, set it down carefully, a little too deliberately between us. Our knees brushed. I noticed the almost imperceptible stiffening of her shoulder. We sipped. Silence again. Short breaths. Small glances. Every movement, stirring the tea, flicking hair behind her ear, was magnified. "You?" I started, then stopped. What? What was I trying to say? That I wanted to reach across and touch her hand. That I wanted to kiss her. My own thoughts felt dangerous, and I pulled them back, like drawing in a catapulted arrow before it could hit. Her gaze met mine. Something unsaid hovered. A pause. A flicker of a smile, almost teasing, almost apologetic. I leaned a fraction closer. She didn't move away. Not yet. My breath hitched. Could she feel the same pull? Did she even know what she wanted? And then, just as my lips felt like they might brush hers, the timer on the oven beeped. We both jumped slightly. Laughter broke through, the quiet, nervous kind that held a hint of relief. My lips retreated. Her hands rested on the counter, fingers brushing the edge, lingering. I wanted to reach for her again, to ask, to say, to cross that line. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I folded my hands, swallowed the tightness in my chest, and tried to sip my tea like nothing had changed. But I knew it had. I knew she had, too. We were walking along the riverbank, the sun low and soft, turning the water into molten gold. The air smelled faintly of wet leaves and something else I couldn't name. Her shampoo, maybe, or just her. I kept my hands shoved into my pockets, even though I wanted to reach for her, to keep her close, to anchor myself to the warmth she brought into a life that often felt half empty. She paused at a bench, sitting before I could. I stayed standing, just a step behind, watching her fold her hands in her lap. "You talk to him a lot," she said suddenly. Her voice was even, but the edge was there, the quick exhale, the way her eyes flicked toward me for a reaction. I froze. "Who?" "Your friend," she clarified, and then laughed softly, almost embarrassed. "You know, the one who thinks he knows everything about you." I felt my stomach tighten. A flicker of something ugly, jealousy or fear or guilt, rose inside me. I wanted to tell her it didn't matter, that I only noticed her. But the words lodged somewhere between my throat and the tips of my fingers. "Don't. I stammered, twisting the hem of my jacket. She looked at me, waiting, patient, like she knew I'd unravel if given enough time. "I know," she said softly. And then, more quietly, almost to herself, "I think I'd be awful if I let myself care too much." Her words landed heavier than she intended. My hands twitched at my sides. I could see the lines of worry around her eyes, the tension in her jaw, the way she shifted just enough to make room for herself, but not for me. I noticed things," I said finally, voice low. "Even little things. And sometimes I notice too much." My fingers itched to reach for hers, to touch, to connect, to undo this distance between us that the world demanded. She didn't look at me, but her hand twitched in response, like a bird unsure whether to take flight. The quiet between us thickened. The rustle of leaves, the distant hum of traffic, it all pressed against the pause in our conversation. "I shouldn't," she started, then faltered. She looked up, and her eyes caught mine. Vulnerable, honest. Something raw glimmered there, and my heart slammed against my ribs. "You shouldn't what?" I whispered, taking an unsteady step closer. She hesitated, fingers brushing the edge of the bench, then letting go. Silence again. A long, measured pause where words would only ruin what wasn't said. I wanted to ask her everything. Why she smiled like that. Why her hand lingered near mine. Why my own pulse betrayed me so easily. But instead I swallowed it. I stayed still, letting the quiet pull us closer, letting the tension do its work. Her lips parted slightly, a shadow of a confession caught there. A laugh trembled, but didn't come. She looked away, then back, and my stomach knotted. And I wondered before the next step, before anything irreversible could happen, would she let herself fall, or would we both retreat back into the safe distance we had always known? I showed up at her apartment one Thursday, like I had a dozen times before, but the hallway was quiet. The soft hum of her music was gone. Her door was closed. I knocked lightly, then louder. No answer. My fingers lingered on the wood, unsure if I wanted her to open it or just confirm that she wasn't there. I slid the key under the frame, something I'd never done, and it hit the floor with a hollow sound. She wasn't in the kitchen. The tea we always shared sat on the counter, cold, a thin film forming on its surface. Her sweater was draped over the back of a chair. Everything was in place, yet completely wrong. I called her later, straight to voicemail. I texted. Nothing. I stared at the screen, thumb hovering over send on a dozen drafts. None of them sent. Each one too heavy, too revealing to me. It wasn't until the weekend that I realized something she'd never said. She had an appointment that morning, pediatrician, she admitted later, for her son. I hadn't known she had one. Not her own child. Not that she was still navigating that part of her life so quietly, without warning. And suddenly, the puzzle made a harsh new shape in my chest. She didn't explain herself when I finally ran into her at the corner store, just glanced at me with a faint, apologetic smile. "Busy," she said. Her eyes flicked down, then back up, like she was measuring how much she could show without breaking something delicate. I wanted to ask, to tell her I didn't care about schedules or kids or baggage. But I stopped. Something in her hesitation, in that quiet wall she'd built without noticing, told me the conversation wasn't mine to start. For days, I found myself hovering in routines I didn't even like. Walking past her apartment, pretending to read the labels at the store, replaying the last time our hands brushed over the mug, the bench, the streetlight. Each memory was a punctuation mark without closure. Her presence became absence in the most ordinary ways. I imagined texts she might have sent, smiles she might have given, conversations that didn't happen. The world moved, and she moved inside it, and I stayed suspended. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused, like life forgot to finish the sentence. I sat on the bench by the river we'd walked before, hands pressed to the cold wood, the echo of her laugh trapped somewhere in my mind. My phone buzzed with a notification I didn't open. I wasn't ready. I wasn't sure if I wanted it, or if I'd run away when it came. I folded my arms, leaned forward, and let the silence fold around me. The sun had gone behind a cloud. Shadows stretched long across the pavement. Everything looked normal. Nothing felt normal. And somewhere inside, I kept waiting for a knock, a text, a look. Anything. But the bench stayed empty. I found her in the kitchen that evening, sleeves rolled up, stirring a pot of soup. The smell of garlic and onions filled the small apartment, warm and grounding. She didn't look up when I stepped in, didn't announce me, just let me stand there. I didn't know what to say. I could apologize, ask, explain, or maybe just leave. But my feet stayed planted. My hands twitched to my sides. "Fee?" she asked, not looking at me. Her voice was soft, the kind that carries more weight than any words could. "Yeah," I said, nodding. I didn't know why I nodded. Maybe just to have something to do. I poured the hot water slowly, careful not to spill. The steam curled between us, and I realized how much I'd missed the quiet ritual. The way she tilted the cup toward me, the way her eyes lingered on my hands instead of my face. I didn't reach out, I started, voice low. I thought maybe it was better if I didn't. My words trailed off. I wasn't sure what I was admitting, only that it felt too heavy to hold in. She stirred the soup again, shoulders tensing just slightly. "I wasn't sure if you wanted to see me," she said, finally, almost whispering. Pause. Her spoon hovered midair, unsteady. Or if any of this was okay. I swallowed. The words I'd rehearsed all week, everything I wanted to say, collapsed into a tight ball in my throat. I reached across the counter slowly, fingers brushing hers. She didn't pull away. Not immediately. I exhaled quietly. The small, human contact made the whole apartment feel larger and smaller at once. She looked up then, eyes catching mine, unguarded, soft. Vulnerable. I notice you, I admitted. Not dramatically, not loudly, just the plain truth. Everything you don't say, everything you do. I notice. She let that settle, then tilted her head and smiled faintly. Small, almost imperceptible, but enough to lift the weight from the room. Enough that my chest loosened. "I notice you too," she said, voice low, steady, almost a confession. And then, after a pause long enough for the world to breathe, she added, "Okay." That single word, soft, simple, felt like permission, like acknowledgement, like quiet agreement without fanfare. I didn't move closer, didn't say more, didn't need to. For the first time in weeks, the tension between us softened, not gone but manageable, real, grounded. We stood there for a moment, hands brushing, eyes flicking, neither speaking. And for the first time, it felt possible that whatever came next, whatever it was, would be ours to navigate, without fear, without pretense. The soup bubbled softly on the stove. Steam curled between us. And we just stayed there, two people paused and breathing in the same quiet space. It was 8:47 a.m. when I first noticed how ordinary life could feel extraordinary. I was sitting on the bench by the river again, the same one we had walked along months ago, but this time she was beside me, her thermos balanced on her knee, steam curling upward. We didn't talk much, just watched the light shift on the water, the ducks paddling lazily and the joggers passing by. I sipped my black coffee, bitter and familiar, and she hummed softly, stirring her tea with a spoon that had long ago lost its shine. Time had moved quietly between us. Weeks had folded into months. The near misses, the pauses, the unsent messages, they all became part of the rhythm we shared. Life was messy. Responsibilities piled up. Her son's soccer game, my late shifts, the emails that never ended. But somehow, the space between us was steady, solid, and unspokenly ours. I remember the first time we'd shared tea in her kitchen, the nearly whispered confessions, the brushed hands over the counter. I remember the night by the river when a single word, "Okay," carried more meaning than anything either of us could have said. She leaned slightly toward me, nudging her shoulder against mine. I felt the subtle warmth and didn't move away. She flicked her eyes toward the ripples on the water, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. I noticed it the way I always notice, and it felt like a promise without words. "Do you ever think about that first night?" I asked softly, almost hesitantly. She laughed quietly, shaking her head. "Sometimes, but I don't dwell. You can't live there forever." I nodded. It was true. We had both learned that. And yet, the memory lingered, a reminder of how far we'd come, how small gestures had carried us to this steady moment. The bench beneath us creaked. The city stirred slowly around us. I watched her stir her tea again, noticing the curl of her fingers, the tilt of her wrist, the subtle way she exhaled when she was comfortable. And I realized that comfort, that shared silence, was enough. It was everything. We didn't speak for a while after that. Didn't need to. The rhythm of our presence, the quiet acknowledgement of each other, was more eloquent than any words. When she finally glanced at me, her eyes caught mine and lingered just long enough. No declarations, no grand gestures, just recognition and the kind of peace you only get when life has been lived and earned. I took a slow sip of my coffee. She smiled, ever so slightly, and reached out to brush a stray lock of hair from my forehead. A tiny gesture. That was all it took. And in that moment, I knew we were home. Not perfect, not flawless, but grounded, warm, and undeniably ours. Some things we didn't need to say aloud. The quiet between us said it all. If this were a video script, you could end with, "Did this story stay with you?" What kind of quiet, real love stories do you want to hear next?